Unlike some popular products, I was not made in China. I was made at UNISA, the university that awarded me my PhD several months ago when Professor Puleng Linkabula invited me to come and deliver the 2023 Es'kia Mphahlele Lecture at my own alma mater. I felt that she had crowned me with untold glory. It is heartening for me to think that in UNISA I have the same alma mater as Es'kia Mphahlele and Chabani Manganyi, his biographer. Both of them amazing high academic achievers. Indeed, Mphahlele's master's thesis, titled The Non-European Character in Essay English Fiction, was the first ever English master's thesis to be passed with distinction at the University of South Africa, and in South Africa, actually. The city of Polokwane, formerly Petersburg, at which we are gathered tonight, like the Mphahlele village of Ma-Panen, less than 100 kilometers northeast of here. These surroundings and this context formed an indelible memory in the childhood years of Es'kia Mphahlele. We are therefore on sacred ground and in ancestral land, in a manner of speaking. But in typical Mphahlelian fashion, such sacredness should neither be understood to be pure nor without its built-in contradictions, or to use a favorite word of Mphahlele, its tyrannies. The very first opening line of Down 2nd Avenue consists of a backhanded, grudging, and somewhat bitter grievance by Mphahlele. And the first line of the book reads like this: I have never known why we, my brother, sister, and I, were taken to the country when I was 5. And thus begins one of the best biographies ever written in this and several other African countries. Perhaps on the first line of Plaatje's native life in South Africa, which is itself a biography of sorts, if only a biography of the land, one can find a somewhat competing opening line in that book, Native Life in South Africa, and it goes like this: awakening on Friday morning, June 20, 1913, the South African native found himself not actually a slave, but a pariah in the land of his birth. Similarly, perhaps we could think of Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom. The first line in that book is once again tellingly a backhanded honor and deference to his father. And it goes like this: apart from life, a strong constitution and an abiding connection to the Tembu royal house, the only thing my father bestowed upon me at birth was a name, Kgolihlahla. More recently, Thando Mngolozana opens his book of fiction titled A Man Who Is Not a Man with a jaw-dropping line. And it starts like this: this story is about how I came to have an abnormal penis. First line of Mngolozana's A Man Who Is Not a Man. I mean, if you read a line like that, you want to know what on earth is going on here. Somewhere between the sublimity of Plaatje's native life in South Africa, Mandela's backhanded deference to a father he lost in his teens, and Mngolozana's jolting opener lies Mphahlele's mercurial bow to the tyranny of place and time in his thought-provoking opener. I have never known why we, my brother, sister, and I, were taken to the country when I was 5. Notably, the lack of knowledge professed in this first line is neither cast in tentative subjunctive mood nor in simple past tense. Rather, it is cast in a carefully orchestrated passé composé, that tense in French and other Romantic languages, which is more than the past perfect tense. It is more intense. That posits a state of ignorance that feels at once irrevocable and irredeemable. I have never known why my brother, sister, and I were taken to the country when I was 5. The insertion of the adverb never in front of the first of the two verbs in this sentence, both of which are cast in the passive, known, taken. Mphahlele does not say, I may never know why I, my brother and sister, were taken. It doesn't say, I did not know why. He says, I have never known why. It's as good as saying, I didn't know then, I don't know now, I will never know. It is, of course, also a rhetorical device intended to register an objection, a typical Mphahlelian objection. In this first sentence is buried a premonition of the bitterness, the resentment, and the indignation that would stalk Mphahlele throughout his life, something he would later describe as the tyranny of place. Sometimes he would say the tyranny of place and the tyranny of time. Tyranny being a word which Mphahlele whips out within the first 12 pages of his biography. In this sense, at least, the day the 3 Mphahlele kids landed in Ma-Panen was also their earliest initiation into, and I quote Mphahlele, the tether which ties us to the center of the South African experience, the tyranny of place and the tyranny of time. It was also the first of several exiles and homecomings, exiles and homecomings being the title of the biography on Mphahlele written by Chabani Manganyi. Exiles and homecomings that were to recur with painful regularity in Mphahlele's 88 years of life on earth. With the first line of the book and the furious lines that follow it, Mphahlele begins to orientate his readers for his lifelong struggle against the twin tyrannies, the tyranny of place and the tyranny of time. As a South African black person, alienated inside and outside, inside of himself, inside of his country, as well as between his country and his exilic countries. Let us not run ahead of ourselves. I want to dwell a little bit in these first few chapters of Down 2nd Avenue. The words, the phrases, the pictures Mphahlele uses to describe his trip to Ma-Panen and his first days in the autumn of 1924 in that village are jolting. Mphahlele proceeds to paint a frightening picture. And I quote him a little longer now. things stand out clearly in my mind from those years. My granny, the mountain on the foot of which the village clung like a leech, the mountain of darkness, so solid and dense, and my granny seemed to conspire with the mountain and the dark to frighten us. End of quote. The first two chapters in Down 2nd Avenue, focused as they are in the messy uprooting of three little kids from Pretoria to what he calls the country, and their separation from their parents, are dripping, these first two chapters, they are dripping with Mphahlelean grievance, pointed irony, sarcasm, and thinly veiled resentment. All around him, no sight is pleasing to his eyes, no sound is soothing, and no smell is alluring. Shade is thrown at his aunts at their very first mention. Nor is the uncle written about with much approval in those first two chapters. But the most ironic and negative description is, of course, reserved for Patele's unsmiling and ungentle paternal grandmother, who is, he says, as big as fate, as forbidding as a mountain, as stern as a mimosa tree. Apart from being used as a boundary marker between the Christian communities and the tribal Król communities, the Lishwana River is also described as the brutal Lishwana River, a river with an angry face that was often carrying on its broad back trees, cattle, and boulders. The village, he goes on to say, was supposedly swarming with long black tropical snakes, as well as vermin, bugs, and lice. So much so that, looking at his first 13 years on earth through the lens of his time in Ma-Panen, Patel concludes, and I quote, "Looking back to those first 13 years of my life, as much of it as I can remember, I cannot help thinking that it was time wasted. I had nobody to shape them into a definite pattern," end of quote. And yet, Mphahlele's apparent antipathy towards Ma-Panen should not be taken literally. It is by and large a literary rhetorical device in the hands of one of the most able storytellers ever to come out of South Africa. It is intended to verbalize the fear, the terror, and the confusion of kids transplanted from familiar surroundings into a strange new world. Much of the biting irony and the disagreeable turn of phrase is a smokescreen from within which Mphahlele guides his readers through the turmoil of his childhood's exilic experience, exile from Pretoria to Ma-Panen. Below and behind the sullen tones of Mphahlele's reminiscences of Ma-Panen, bits and pieces of humanity and generosity break through the cracks. When his maternal grandmother saw him and his siblings being fetched by their mother to return to Pretoria, she breaks down and cries. And she begs their mother to change her mind. Now, Es'kia recognizes, albeit a little grudgingly, that inside the chest of his maternal grandma, who he said was as forbidding as a mountain and as stern as a mimosa tree, there was a beating heart that actually loved him and his siblings enough to cry when they were leaving to go back to Pretoria. Behind and below it all, Ma-Panen was slowly warming its place into their heart and engraving itself in gold in the soul of young Mphahlele. So much so that the voice of Marabastad hawker called Dinkudikai, father of Mphahlele's first love, Riboni, unfortunately Riboni didn't love him back. He likened the voice of Dinkudikai to the echoes in the mountains of Ma-Panen, at once sharp, cold, forbidding, and reassuring. The sojourn in Ma-Panen and Pietersburg always acted for Mphahlele as a lens through which he would read the confusing aspects of life in Marabastad and everywhere else he went in the world. He puts it like this, and I quote, "Countless times I have dreamed about the deep valleys and craggy mountains of Pietersburg. I have revisited them in my dreams. Every time I've been trapped by the huge mountains and I've had endless echoes chasing after me while I ran all the time." End of quote. There is a sense in which when Mphahlele went looking for all over the world, he says, I was in search of something. What it was, I didn't know, but it was there where it wasn't. Inside me. Was it Marabastad he was looking for? Was it Ma-Panen that he was looking for across the world? Or was it something else? One thing for sure, neither Ma-Panen nor Marabastad ever died inside Mphahlele, even after Marabastad was razed to the ground. Much like Don Matera's little book titled Memory is the Weapon and Blok Mudisane's Blame Me on History, these two books are tenacious refusals to let Sophiatown die. And similarly, Mphahlele would not in his heart allow Ma-Panen and Marabastad to die. Much like Desmond Tutu's refusal to let the township of Mahweteng, where he was born outside Klerksdorp, to die just because apartheid government cleared it in order to build a white suburb. Once when Es'kia Mphahlele was in Lesotho, standing in the thick darkness of the night, until he went up on top of the mountain of Mushweshwe, overlooking the Caledon River, Mphahlele believes that at that moment, on that day, he found out what it is he had been looking for in all his wanderings. And I use wanderings deliberately, the Wanderers being, of course, his first full-length novel. And it describes what he had found like this, and I'm going to quote him at length. "I knew then what I had been looking for. A fatally beautiful lady called bitterness. I knew I had wanted to love her, to caress her, to kiss her, but not in Swanbenian fashion, to be beaten to death by her. Only if I chased after and loved her could I strangle her, the lady called bitterness. I could hang her up to dry and show her up to the mockery of the elements. She's in my arms now. I do not kiss her anymore. The blue fire of our kisses has turned white. She has beaten my sleep. I have sucked her dry. That not so long ago looked like a full-blown sail in a cottishly censer spout. I have tamed her. She's the mistress of my dull, useless moments, so I can stamp my foot on the ground to have her once proud head chopped off, the head that once launched 1,000,000 corpuscles in my blood, which chafed against the roots of my hair." End of quote. I knew then what I had been looking for, a fatally beautiful lady called bitterness. Switching effortlessly between narrative and dialogue, and between what Mphahlele called writing as self-expression and as an objective reporting of the social scene. Between one country and the next, between the first to the second and third person, Mphahlele's prose is sublime in its beauty and devastating in its ferocity. Suddenly he talks in the first person, and then the next paragraph is now in the third person, and then it's a dialogue. What makes Mphahlele's narratives particularly impactful is his brutal honesty as a writer. Born into the harsh reality of the 1913 Land Act, living through the depression of the 1930s, the Herzog Bills, Marabastad, Philadelphia in the USA, Ma-Panen near here, Lagos, where he finished writing up down 2nd Avenue. We have Lagos to thank for that. The book might never have been finished if he stayed here. Denver, Colorado in the USA, Nairobi, where he worked for a few years. Mphahlele could have chosen to write soothing narratives, but he chose honesty. And one of the things he was honest about was his sense of suffocating bitterness. He wanted to embrace bitterness, to deal with it, just like the quote I've just read in full. He was bitter about the whites who gymmed him and joined him and buoyed him all over Pretoria. Hey boy, hey Jim, hey John, they would say to him. One day a white typist said to him, hey boy, and he went to her and he said, how do you know I'm a boy and not a girl? He was bitter about the Asians of Marabastad, who seemed not to carry the full share of the weight of white racism. Though frightened, he seems to have secretly enjoyed the beating which his aunt, Dora, gave to one Abdul, the trader, who tried to shortchange her. And so he tells this story of how Dora and Abdul fought. And Abdul tried to say, Dola, Dola, don't do that, Dola, don't do that, Dola. And she had him by the scruff of the neck and they rolled together on the ground. And young Patel was shaking there. Mphahlele was bitter about what he called churchianity. The churchianity that masqueraded as Christianity, when in fact it was part of a system that treated black people as tabula rasa, to be written over by the new systems and new religion and new civilization. He was bitter about an education system designed to eliminate black initiative and black creativity. He was bitter about the Land Act of 1913, which was already in place when he was born. But deep down, he knew that if, and I quote him, if you give people a poor education, the mind will soon find out, and revolt is inevitable. The mind cannot be chained forever. This much they know, the strong men all over the world, end of quote. Mphahlele was bitter about the black homeland leaders, like Patudi and Pepu, who, when flanked by white officials at parades and extravagant homeland banquets, walked and looked like the prisoners that they were. Although I have read several of Mphahlele's fiction, especially his short stories, I have tried to restrict myself to his self-reflective nonfiction, notably the autobiographical. But I've also taken note of the biography written by Chabane Manganyi, who also published another biography on Gerald Sikoto. One of the characteristic distinguishers of Mphahlele's work, fiction and nonfiction, is his relentless and tenacious focus on the human. In a chapter focused on his experiences as a trainee teacher at Adams College in Amazimtoti, Mphahlele describes Adams College, which he rated much lower than St. Peter's in Rosettenville, where he had been also. He describes Adams College as a human jungle of about 400 men and women. Now, in this characterization of the college as a human jungle, I believe that Mphahlele provides a clue to the basic lens through which he reads settings and contexts. He basically sees them as human jungles. His perspective starts with the human and stays with the human throughout. In this regard, it would be next to impossible to list the members of the Mphahlele dramatis personae for down 2nd Avenue. If you tried to list the characters who are there, you will get lost. It would be very difficult to turn that book into a play, but I wouldn't say it is impossible. Because the book is literally a human jungle. Beginning with Ma-Panen and the Mphahlele cast, you have his mother Eva, you have his father Moses, a man who had a terrible limp. His aunt Dora calls him the hyena. Aunt Dora, who I spoke about already. Solomon and Geli, his siblings. Old Modise, old Sikhone, old Riba, Tema and his girlfriend from the hidden side of the village. And at Marabastad, it's an even thicker human jungle. His maternal grandmother Hibila, Ma Genewar, Ma Likhodi, Doki, Butalem the gangster who had killed several people. Bishop Nzama of the Gaza Church, the guy who went underground for some time and claimed to have resurrected like Jesus Christ. Matebula, the witch doctor, who always had his bones in front of him, not far from their house at 2nd Avenue. Ratau, Sangli, the Chinaman who was a businessman. Bishop Ramushu of the Donkey Church. Kuzwi, the school principal. Fluenza, Abdul, the Indian shop owner to whom I referred. Muloyi, and Ribone, the child of Dinkudikai. And Ribone is quite special because she taught her own father to read and write. Dinkudikai was so scared of the police. I mean, this characterization of so many people, like you know them, as I read their names out, it's as if I can see them. Joel, son of Malibon, who was so afraid of his mother, more afraid of his mother than his wife, until his wife Anna left him. And the whites, whose washing Patel had to collect by bicycle so that his aunt Dora could wash and earn some money. Among them was Ma Bottles, a white woman who was always half drunk. And Mrs. Chobolo, another white woman who was very, very harsh. Old Ramitzi, father of Butalam. And so it goes. And these characters that I'm rattling out are not merely named. Each one of them is characterized very powerfully. Few black biographies lay bare the gory details of the forest of humanity like Mphahlele's. Part of Africa My Music is a recap of Mphahlele's actual and superbly crafted encounters with the who's who of the world, especially of Africa. He talks about Yuli Beya, about being with Wole Soyinka, about being with Amos Tutiola, about being with Kwame Nkrumah, with Kenneth Kaunda at conferences before Kenneth Kaunda became Kenneth Kaunda. You know what I mean? Being with W.E.B. Du Bois, being with Patrice Lumumba before Patrice Lumumba became Patrice Lumumba. Being with Frantz Fanon, whom we misquote quite a lot nowadays. Being with Amaata Aidu, that sharp-tongued Ghanaian writer who ended up in politics. Being with Joshua Nkomo, being with James Ngugi, later on to become Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Being with Abiose Nicole, being with Okot Bitek. All these names, if you read Africa My Music, he rattles them out. African humanist that he is, Mphahlele is relentless about his focus on human characters, both in fiction and non-fiction. Indeed, for him, even the mountains, the rivers, the villages, the stars, the streets, and the smells of the air take on human characteristics. I've never been to Ma-Panen, but I can see the Lishwana River with its white sands. And I can see when it was full and it coming down with rocks and everything, carrying cattle, as it says, it sometimes did. Few Mphahlele pieces illustrate and demonstrate his quest for balance, as his piece on Lillian Ngoyi. It is called Guts and Granite. The real power of Mphahlele as a writer is best unleashed and most unequivocal in his short stories. No one can read The Suitcase, Man Must Leave, Mrs. Plum, or Dinner at 8 and be left unmoved. When Nadine Gordimer first read The Suitcase, she immediately wanted to meet Mphahlele. You know the story of The Suitcase, right? A man is sitting in a bus, two women come in, one of them is carrying a suitcase. They forget the suitcase next to him. He picks it up and claims it is his, goes home with it, and the police come and say, you took a suitcase, let's see what's inside. No, it is mine, it's mine. Do you know what is inside? Yes, I know. It's some clothes and so on. And they open, they find some clothes. And what else do they find? A dead baby. Is this yours too? Powerful storyteller. Nadine Gordimer is hit by that story, and of course they become friends for the rest of their lives. Even Down 2nd Avenue is really a series of short stories, if you think about it. It is the trademark Mphahlele art to tell a short story. Mphahlele considered himself nothing but a teacher who read voraciously and who always wanted to write. He had no illusions about the power of literature. He cautioned against hallucinations about the capacity of literature to spark and sustain a revolution. For him, it was important and enough that he taught and he wrote. That's why when he came back and the University of the North wouldn't give him a job as professor of English, it was very painful for him. That's why when he was expelled as a teacher, it became one of the most painful exiles for him when he was exiled from being a teacher. Now, in this world where artificial intelligence of robots threatens to displace and phase out the human eye, AI versus the human eye, Mphahlele reminds us to focus on the human in all their bitternesses, in all their possibilities, in all their powerlessnesses, if there is such a word, and in all their ability to wound one another, to wound the earth, to wound animals, and to wound fellow humans. In this era where everyone who thinks they amount to something wishes to write the narrowest of navel-gazing biographies, biographies in which people attempt to pump themselves up like bullfrogs, it may be prudent to return to Es'kia Mphahlele and learn how to locate our tiny little biographies in the forest of humanity, in the tyranny of place, context, and time, so that we are able to insert our own stories in the much bigger story that we are part of. When we do this, we will realize how connected we are, one to another, us and fellow creatures, us and the mountains, us and the rivers, us and the smells we emit. We are connected. In this era, where we have the app, we have the gadget, we have the pill, we have the drink, and the tactic to solve all the problems of the world except our most human problems. Come, let us learn from Patel's lifelong wrestling with the fatally beautiful lady called bitterness. Oh, how he spent a lifetime at war with the fellow travelers of Lady Bitterness, bigotry, ignorance, and self-hate. Nane kiri itlang batho beshu, itlang re gopole ngwana Mphahlele dilisha tša mašwabane ke mokgakga wa Mmakubela wa Ntšhidikgolo. Ba re mokgakga ga a šome marega o tšhaba go palega manga. Gomme le selemo ha a šome o tšhaba go tšwa sethogothogo. Loko a ri mina mngwanati ndi n'wana mabyeletela lowo teka vulombe a tshika vulongo. Pu choyoyo xa mina i bango.